back to another Capital Update. I'm Jason Atkins, Executive Director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference, and we are heading toward the finish line here at the state capitol. About 5 weeks left of the legislative session. Legislators are busy crafting their omnibus bills, putting them together, both finance bills and policy bills, and then getting those through committee and passing them off the floor. For lobbyists, this is really a challenging time because we have to read a lot of pages of material, make sure all of our provisions are in there, or provisions that we don't want in bills are struck. So reading a lot of legalese with a fine-tooth comb and connecting with legislators, sitting in on committee hearings, and dotting all the I's and crossing the T's. But if you're a law nerd and a legislative geek, this is like the Super Bowl. So a lot of fun, and Minnesota Catholic Conference staff is certainly in the mix on a lot of key pieces of legislation, whether it's counseling legislators on important legislation related to the sale of human remains. That was something that came up on the floor in the House this week, in which a bill was passed as part of the Public Safety Omnibus that would ban the sale of bones, and we were instrumental in getting a helpful fix to the original language, which we thought was troublesome in the sense that it actually authorized the broader sale of human remains while only banning the sale of skulls in oddity shops, for example. So the author was able to change that, and now we have a full ban on the sale of bones in the legislation. We think it should have gone farther and banned the sale of all human remains, because human beings, whether in whole or in part, are not commodities to be sold. That legislation still protects for organ donation and donation for scientific purposes, but the principle that we're trying to advance is that human beings should not be commodified, whole or in part. Again, we were disappointed that that legislation didn't go further, but as it's currently crafted to ban the sale of bones, that's a good step in the right direction. Another bill that was in the Public Safety Omnibus that was amended into it in the House was a bill, House File 4793. And what that would do is to create criminal penalties for those who impinge on the duties of mandatory reporters of child maltreatment and sexual abuse. Unfortunately, the Catholic Church has learned some difficult lessons about sex abuse in our churches, and particularly organizational cultures that prevent and discourage people from reporting sex abuse. And we know that sex abuse is not simply a Catholic Church problem. We're reading about it every day. This is a societal-wide problem. And fortunately, the lessons learned by the Church in this context and the safe environment procedures that have been implemented are already serving as a model for advances in mandatory reporting, especially legislation at the Capitol. So we were pleased to be able to provide support for House File 4793, Senate File 4037. The authors are Representative Jim Nash and Senator Nicole Mitchell. Representative Nash offered some very moving testimony on the floor about his own experience of abuse and how the mandatory reporters in his life failed him. And we want to create and encourage organizational cultures that don't discourage mandatory reporting. And so the penalties for impinging on the duties of mandatory reporters in those bills are hopefully going to go a long way to address the core of what is often the problem. The disbelief within an organization that a colleague could be guilty of abuse because of especially the reputational harm that would follow from an accusation of abuse, and the way in which organizations and communities cover up that abuse and try to protect the predators in our midst. But what we really need to do is get over those organizational cultures, discourage those insular organizational cultures, and make sure that our children are protected, particularly in the school context as well, where parents are entrusting their children on a daily basis. So proud to be a part of that legislation and encouraging that, and exciting to see that moving forward on the House side, and we hope that that advances forward on the Senate side as well. It was a big week for assisted suicide legislation in the media, and we're excited to see both pieces, op-eds being published, but also a major piece in the Star Tribune profiling one of our prominent advocates, two of our prominent advocates, Kathy and Kylan Ware, who've been great advocates since this legislation was introduced 10 years ago against assisted suicide, highlighting the dignity of all persons and getting to that important principle that really assisted suicide promotes ableism and discrimination against people with disabilities, telling their story about what it means that when we say that a life of dignity is one in which we can exercise autonomy and independence. Well, what does that say about persons with disability who live their lives in dependence upon others? Are their lives less dignified because of that? So this issue speaks to important questions of human dignity and certainly a salient topic in the church today, with the Vatican coming out on Monday with a whole document dedicated to human dignity, in which both the issues of discrimination against people with disability and assisted suicide were raised. And so we'll certainly link to that in this video, but also link to the story as well about Kathy and Kylan Ware and the movement to oppose assisted suicide in Minnesota, precisely because of its discrimination and its ableism. So a big week on those issues. We're continuing to monitor a number of others. More and more conversations being had around sports betting and gambling expansion as we go towards session. And we're certainly advocating with legislators to stop gambling expansion and online sports betting, making the arguments about, even if there were to be, what kind of safeguards should those look like? For example, a ban on push notifications, bans on betting on college sports, bans on in-game betting, all of these safeguards to stop problem gambling and correct what might be the worst abuses of a predatory gaming system. So keep staying up to date on what's going on at the Capitol through the Catholic Advocacy Network. You can sign up at mncatholic.org, again, mncatholic.org, and we'll connect you to your legislators with a click of the mouse. People often ask me, is it worth it? Is it worth it to take the time? Well, we make it so easy for you, so that the answer is yes. It's almost at zero cost to you to click the mouse. You can even personalize those messages that you can send to legislators, but it really does make an impact. Legislators are always keeping track of how many issues and pieces of legislation about which they're being contacted for or against, whether they agree or disagree. They do want to know what constituents think, and oftentimes it can sway them to perhaps be less vocal, even if they disagree with you, or more supportive if they do. So we always have to be faithful citizens, step forward, contact our legislators, because it really does make a difference. Again, the best way to do that is go to the Catholic Advocacy Network at our website, mncatholic.org. Again, that's mncatholic.org. Thanks so much for being with us today. We look forward to connecting with you again next week for another Capitol Update. I'm Jason Adkins from the Minnesota Catholic Conference. Thanks very much, and God bless your day.